بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، إخوة الإسلام عباد الله, it's not my intention to take up too much time. Uh, but the topic is, as mentioned in the description, what is his position with so and so? What is his position with so and so? And so, for me to uh, deal with this particular matter and for the people to understand and what the intent of that title is, then I like to take a look at a principle that's found in Al-Qawa'id Al-Fiqhiyya. Al-Qawa'id Al-Fiqhiyya. That principle being لا ينسب لساقة قول ولكن السكوت في وقت الحاجة بيان. That principle is translated to mean that there is no attributing to a person who remains quiet on a matter a statement. يعني a statement, a position, a belief, and thus forth and so on. However, in a time of necessity and or need, yani then remaining quiet or being quiet is a clarification, yani as it relates to an individual's position and or understanding and or belief in the matter. Now, this particular principle, when going into the books of Qawa'id al-Fiqh, you find that this particular principle has with it two components. And both these components indicate two slightly different things. The first of the components is the first portion of the principle. There is no attributing a statement, position, or belief to one who remains quiet on an issue. That is the first component. And this component, as it relates to this particular principle, this is the foundation in that regard. Meaning, you cannot attribute something to someone unless you have heard an explicit statement from them. This is the foundation, and this is what is generally applied. Then you have the second component, however, remaining silent or quiet during a time of necessity and or need is a clarification. This particular component, this second component, as it relates to this principle, is more particularized. It's not used generally. It's not the foundation. It is particularized to certain circumstances and or situations. Now, to better bring about an understanding of what is intended when I say the foundation is this and this portion is more particularized, then if we were to look at the prohibition of khinzir, or uh, the flesh of swine, or pork, then the fundamental principle or the fundamental ruling as it relates to that is that it's prohibited. This is the fundamental ruling. This is what is general and generally applied. And as a result, this is what is generally taught, that pork is prohibited, period. However, there are particularized conditions, particularized circumstances that will allow for the eating of pork. But these circumstances are not the foundation. They are what you call an exception to the rule. They are an exception to the rule. So just like we have that with pork, and when we're dealing with this principle that I'm referring to, the first component is what is applied generally speaking, and that second component is what you call an exception to the rule. An exception to the rule. And so, in order for us to understand better what is intended by the first component, there's no attributing to one who remains quiet a statement, then we have to look at how the A'imma of the past would phrase this particular principle. They would say about this particular principle, من نصب إلى ساقط قولا أو اعتقادا فقد افترى عليه. Whoever attributes to one who remains silent about a matter a statement or a belief, then indeed he has invented a lie against him. Indeed, he has invented a lie against him. And this is because there is no way possible for somebody to determine the position of another if he literally hasn't spoken on it. If he literally has not spoken a word about the issue. How could a person come in and say that Al Anjelesi's position concerning this matter is this, or Al Anjelesi's position concerning this matter is that, if they've literally never heard me make a statement about the issue? It is impossible. And so now to attribute a position to myself or to attribute a position to someone else concerning a matter, then this would be tantamount to oppression and tantamount to inventing a lie against an individual, as nobody is charged with trying and or attempting to determine the hearts of men, the hearts of men. And so this particular principle, it illustrates the justice that is found within the superior and perfected Islamic legislation. The superior and perfected Islamic legislation. That we don't go off of conjecture and or assumptions when speaking about others and their positions and their beliefs on matters. On the contrary, we base our understanding of people's positions or outlooks on things based on certainty. And there's nothing that's more certain concerning a person than an explicit statement from him or her. From him or her. So I want to narrow down this particular discussion as pertains to positions with people and or individuals, or should I say, yani being more exact, with callers, because there's a lot of callers involved in dawah today, and in some cases there's a lot of positions being attributed to people concerning this caller or that caller that may not necessarily be true. Now, I want to give an example to kind of cement the point that I'm making. I want to give the example of the brother Tahir Wyatt. There is a group of people that hurled the accusation at Tahir Wyatt that he agrees with the mistakes or some of the mistakes of Shadid Muhammad, for instance. And although they haven't heard a statement from Tahir explicitly stating that, they look at the fact that because he keeps quiet about Shadid Muhammad, that he's with him, he agrees with him, and thus forth and so on. And thus forth and so on. So it's that basically the connected dots minhaj that some of the mashayikh criticize some brothers for in the past for falling into. But when we look at Tahir Waya, for instance, and Shadid Muhammad, I was informed by our brother Muhammad Abu Harb, may Allah preserve him, that he heard Tahir Wyatt express or acknowledge some mistakes of Shadid. And I believe this was years ago. But he held the position that that wasn't the best way to remedy Shadid. Some of the warnings that were taking place against Shadid at that time, that it wasn't the best way to remedy the issues concerning Shadid. Now, with this being said, there can be no blame on Tahir in that regard for holding a position of that nature. Why is that? Because when it comes to the scholars may differ over people based on some of those same reasons. And if you find a scholar keeping quiet on another individual whom another scholar may be warning against, nobody in a right mind now says this scholar over here that keeps quiet on this other individual is really down with him in accordance with the mistakes that he's making, and thus forth and so on. We never hear that. Yet, when it comes to the students involved in Dawah here in the States, it's something different. I'm going to quote basically the statements of, or summarize the statement of Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, when he gave a breakdown as it relates to why the ulama differ over individuals. Why the ulama differ over individuals. And it's a clip that's on YouTube now. I don't recall the title of it because it's been quite some time since I saw it. But that was Sheikh Suleiman explained and expounded upon was very beneficial. First, he stated that there may be differing amongst the ulama on an individual based off khilaf thubut al-kalam. They're differing as it relates to if statements about an individual can be firmly established or firmly established that the individual made the statement. And this is because a group of people may come to a scholar and they say, yeah, Sheikh, we heard so-and-so say this. And this particular scholar is looking at these individuals who's bringing them the information, and he has a negative opinion about the people who are bringing him the information. He may consider them to be liars or deceitful or whatever the case may be. And so he totally rejects the news that they're bringing to him. Whereas these individuals may go to another scholar, and another scholar accepts what they have to say. He accepts what it is that they're bringing to him. So this is one of the reasons why the scholars differ. And we see this happening today. We see within the fitna, known as the fitna of the Sa'afiqah, we find that some of the ulama in Medina were receiving news from certain individuals that other scholars consider to be troublemakers. So you have some of these scholars accepting these people's statements, while other scholars throughout Medina knew that this person is one of the biggest troublemakers in Medina. There's no way we're accepting what he has to say. There's no way that we're accepting what he has to say. So we see an example of this in what is occurring as it relates to the fitna of the Sa'afiqah. Two, Sheikh Sulaiman, he continued, he stated after that, you may have a situation where the statement of a person is established. All of the scholars are agreeing that so and so said such and such. However, they have different fi fahwa al-kalam. They have different as it relates to what was intended by the statement. Because sometimes some statements can be worded in a way that have what we call ihtimalat, multiple possibilities. It's possible that one could walk away understanding this from that statement, and it's possible one could walk away understanding something else. So one group of scholars are understanding it one way, and another group of scholars are understanding it a different way. And as a result of that, they differ concerning an individual. Then you have the third situation, and that is if the speech is established upon a person, plus there's only one meaning that can be held from the individual speech, then they differ on if the speech is of the magnitude that he will be dealt with in a particular way. So they're differing on the magnitude of the speech. Should it be warned against? Should this happen? Should that happen? And thus forth and so on. And so they may disagree in these, as it relates to these three aspects that Sheikh Sulaiman pointed out. But even when they disagree in that regard, one, you don't find them warning against one another. You don't find them warning against one another. And then two, you don't find the students who are taking knowledge from these scholars and having ihtiram for these scholars breaking into groups and factions based off, is he with Sheikh so-and-so in his position against so-and-so? Is he with Sheikh so-and-so in his position against so-and-so? At least not the sincere students that are truly traversing upon the methodology of the Salaf and truly have ihtiram for the ulama. You don't find them doing this. But unfortunately, here in the States, we find people doing the opposite of that. The opposite of that. So when we look at these factors, well, before I continue, if we see that the scholars differ over individuals for these same reasons, then it's easy to understand that the differing amongst the du'at in the West may occur for these same reasons. For these same reasons. And so it is not correct for us as callers within the dawah to act in other than a manner than how the scholars act when these things occur. It's not befitting for us to act in other than a manner than how the scholars act when these particular things occur. So these particular things that Sheikh Sulaiman mentioned, these can be from the reasons why a da'i, a particular da'i, may remain quiet on an individual. But the reality is no one is really able to determine why a caller is remaining quiet. As a caller remaining quiet on an individual is not a proof for his agreement with the individual nor disagreement. It's not a proof for either or to attribute a position to him. And there are other reasons why a da'i may remain quiet on another da'i for perceived mistakes. It could be that, just like what was mentioned previously, the caller doesn't believe that this is the way that you go about remedying the individual and remedying the problem. A caller may have the opinion that it's not suitable to warn against the person's mistake in a public manner based off the condition of the people, because if this comes, it will cause a greater splitting amongst the people. Or it could be that a particular caller is just not clear on the matter. And in fact, he may be saying, look, I'm too busy to even look into that. I'm too busy doing this and doing that. I don't have time for that. The possibilities are many. The possibilities are many. And no one has been burdened in trying to determine why someone may remain quiet on a particular issue. Perhaps that particular caller might have done what some of the Mashaykh advised with when they said, when problems amongst the callers in the West arise, return it back to your elders. And me, I'm a 41-year-old grown man, but I'm not from amongst the elders here in America. We have brothers that have been involved in dawah that are knocking on their 70s, that are over 60 years old, knocking on their 70s. People like Sheikh Dawood Adib, people like Sheikh Abdul Rauf Shakir, people like Sheikh Farid Abdullah, who's no longer in the States now. But these are our elders. It may be that a caller may have taken the affair back to the elders and they said, don't bother yourself with, don't busy yourself with that. The point is, the main point that I'm making is, it is not correct that a caller remains quiet for whatever reason he may be remaining quiet, that he has not revealed to the people. It is not correct for people to start sitting around second guessing, oh, he's with this and he's with that. How do you know that? How can you determine that if this caller hasn't spoken on the issue? This would be tantamount to inventing a lie against an individual. And this is, in reality, not following what is certain, but in reality, following conjecture. And the following of conjecture opposes the methodology of the Salaf. وَمَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ إِنْ يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, he states, and they do not have with them any knowledge. They only follow conjecture. And indeed, conjecture as it relates to the truth does not benefit it in the least. Conjecture as relates to the truth does not benefit it in the least. So the main point that I'm making, that it is not permissible to attribute a statement to a person, a statement, position, belief, and thus for someone to a person concerning a matter who has not explicitly spoken on that matter. Who has not explicitly spoken on that matter. Because to do so would be tantamount to dhulm and tantamount to slander and thus forth and so on. And that's about as deep as I want to go in that particular matter. And I pray that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala brings about rectification between the ranks of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah in the US and the UK. And with that, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.